Today, more controversial trades and holdings by top Federal Reserve officials were discovered. Chairman Jerome Powell is among those in the spotlight. There have never been more cargo ships waiting to dock at the Port of Los Angeles. What's behind it? And China's second largest real estate developer facing a possible default. Could it be the next Lehman Brothers? We talked to an analyst. That and much more coming up at NTD Business. Good evening. Great to have you with us. I'm Paul Graney. Consumers seem to be feeling a little better this month after sentiment hit its lowest level in a decade in August. But worries persist. Despite the improvement shown in the University of Michigan survey, consumers continue to have doubts about the economy. One official says consumers' increasing disillusionment ended in early September, but consumers still don't expect much progress. Their views of inflation remain elevated, but they seem to have stopped charging higher as they did over the summer. At that time, key official gauges of price increases hit their highest level in years, and the survey's one-year inflation outlook now matches July's reading of 4.7%. That's the highest level since 2008. And the Federal Reserve says it will review its ethics rules after an overlap was discovered between what the Fed was buying and what top officials, including Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, were holding. Powell held up to $2.5 million in municipal bonds in family trusts. They were bought in 2019, but the Fed bought $5 billion worth of those bonds in 2020. Powell says he didn't personally have control over any of those transactions. Boston Fed President Eric Rosengren traded real estate investment products almost 40 times, while the Fed bought almost $700 billion worth of mortgage-backed securities. And Dallas Fed President Robert Kaplan made over $24 million trades last year. He says he will sell his individual shares now and won't trade stocks while serving as president, but he insists his actions didn't violate Fed rules. So joining us to discuss the apparent conflict of interest at the Federal Reserve is Chief Strategist with RIA Advisors, Lance Roberts. Roberts helps manage over $1 billion in assets for RIA. Lance, pleasure to have you in the show as always. Thanks very much for coming on. Is there really a story here, do you feel, or as the Fed intervenes to support the markets, is there bound to be some overlap or conflict of interest?
Absolutely. It's an interesting story. And again, I think this has to go, ultimately, and it needs to be investigated more. Because, look, here's the bottom line of this. I'm an investment advisor. I have a fiduciary responsibility to my clients to follow the rules and not do things to take advantage of my clients for my own best interest. And that includes things like, for instance, I can't buy a stock. Let's say, like you said, I manage $1 billion of assets for clients. So when we go buy a position in Apple or in Microsoft, we're buying a fairly large chunk of stock. We have the ability to move prices in a stock when we make purchases. So if I go and buy that stock first and then go buy it for my clients, that's called front running, and that's wrong. Right? That's just, even if you just think about it, it's just not physically, it's not morally right to do that for clients. So when you look at all these things that go on, and it's not just the Federal Reserve, it's also Congress. There are many instances of Congress insider trading on information they knew about what was going to go on with the economic shutdown. They knew they were going to shut down the economy. They knew what they were going to be working on. And Congress members were buying stocks like Zoom and Citrix and other things that were going to benefit from that shutdown in particular before they made those announcements. That's insider trading under any definition. The Federal Reserve, knowing that they're going to be doing $1.2 trillion worth of liquidity flows every 10 months and putting all this money in, and knowingly know that they're going to make an announcement that they're going to be buying junk bond ETFs and the like, they held assets. They were buying stocks that were going to benefit directly from that monetary intervention. Now, it's just simply a function that the same rules need to apply to our elected officials that apply to us and apply to individuals. If you went and bought stocks and insider information, you would be in jail right now, but that doesn't apply to our elected officials. That question should be why, and why doesn't it?
Is there an agency, or what happens next? Is there someone who can independently really investigate these accusations or activities?
No, they're going to investigate themselves. Here's the irony of all this, right? Is that the only reason this is an issue is because they got caught. And let's not forget this point. Had Richard Kaplan, who traded more than $20 million worth, I mean, as far as we know, it's 20 million. It could be a lot more, but he traded more than $1 million in shares of 20 different positions. The only reason that we even know this story exists because he had to make the disclosures, and that disclosure got picked up by the media. Had the media not picked this up, this would have never been knowledge, and they would still be doing this. And the only reason that Richard Kaplan came out and said, okay, I'll sell my shares now, to comply with some ethical, moral responsibility, is because he got caught. If he hadn't got caught, he'd still be doing it. And now this is very ludicrous. There is no government oversight agency for federal officials, so they're going to investigate their own ethics and potentially come up with some strategy to help them not stray morally from the code of ethic responsibility in the future. But that's only because they got caught. This is essentially the same thing as me robbing a bank and getting caught by the cops, and the cops say, well, you can either give back the money or you can go to jail. That's all this is. They just got caught red-handed, and now they're just trying to make it look better. But this doesn't solve the real underlying moral responsibility and ethical responsibility of our elected officials.
Is this the first time it's happened? Well, how did it get caught this time?
It's just, it's been going on for a long time. It was just the size. And again, they're all doing this, right? Even Jerome Powell has now kind of gotten swept up into this. The only reason this was a story is because Richard Kaplan is extremely wealthy. He used to be a partner at Goldman Sachs. Surprise. By the way, the majority of our government officials are all from Goldman Sachs, but he had very large positions, 20 positions. He traded more than $1 million in during 2020, during the pandemic, when they were buying $120 billion a month. If it had been just some guy with a couple of $1 million, you wouldn't even know about this story. But it was so large, that's what brought this to surface. And again, a lot of our elected officials have gotten very rich. Nancy Pelosi, in particular, has made millions during the pandemic, trading options, buying stocks that they knew, and her husband both knew that they were going to be affecting the economy with because of their decision-making in Washington.
Lance Roberts, RIA Advisors. And there have never been more cargo ships waiting to dock in California. The port blames a buying binge by Americans for driving up imports. And a trucking CEO recently told us there aren't enough truckers to take the cargo from the port or even workers to process it. NTD's Cynthia Kai with more.
Aerial views of the Port of Los Angeles show dozens of cargo ships backed up along the Los Angeles coast, waiting to enter the port. On September 15th, the Port of Los Angeles announced during a media briefing cargo volume during the first 8 months of 2021 saw a significant increase compared to the same time period in 2020.
Driven by the ongoing American buying surge, we're having an exceptional 2021, up more than 30% during the first 8 months of the year. We've already processed almost 7.3 million container units, and it looks like this trend will continue straight through year 2022.
Despite the overall increase, last month, the port moved just over 954,000 shipping containers, called TEUs. This was slightly less than August 2020, when the port set the month's record with just over 961,000 TEUs moved. However, exports from the Port of Los Angeles continue to decline.
Drop coincides with many issues that we've highlighted before. We must get our exporters back in the game. We've made some very solid recommendations to the Biden administration, including creating the right incentives to start turning around these numbers quickly.
According to a press release, Port of Los Angeles is North America's leading seaport by container volume and cargo value. Earlier this year, dozens of cargo ships were reportedly backed up along the Northern California coastline. Back in March, Port of Oakland also reported large volumes of shipping cargo waiting to enter the port. Cynthia Kai, NTD News, California.
And after little-known automaker Rivian became the first to produce a consumer-ready electric truck, Ford is boosting production of the electric version of its best-selling pickup truck. It's due out next year, and Ford says consumer demand is very strong. And there's Andrew Thomas with more.
Ford says it's boosting its F-150 Lightning production to 80,000 per year due to strong demand for the electric pickup truck. It says it'll invest hundreds of millions of dollars and add 450 hourly jobs across 3 Michigan facilities to boost production.
Yeah, today we announced that we are investing incremental $250 million in this facility where I'm talking to you from in Dearborn, Michigan. It is from our Rouge site. Rouge is one of the most iconic automotive manufacturing sites in the world.
Ford's move comes as industry observers question whether consumers will give up their gas-powered pickups for electric models. The new electric model already has over 150,000 reservations. The Lightning is an electric version of Ford's best-selling gas-powered F-150 truck. Ford and other global automakers are racing to shift their gasoline-powered lineups to all-electric power.
Well, you know, F-150 is one of the most iconic vehicles, not just for our company, for the industry. And that is our fundamental strategy, is to electrify.
The Rouge Electric Vehicle Center is assembling the electric pickups and is a test lab for new manufacturing technology. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And cigarette giant Philip Morris just bought a majority stake in an inhaler company. International health groups, though, aren't too happy with the deal, and they're asking the UK government to intervene. Indeed, Evelyn Lee has more.
Philip Morris International, a cigarette giant, has bought a company that makes asthma inhalers, and that's despite objections from health advocacy groups. PMI is the producer of Marlboro and Parliament cigarettes and now also the majority shareholder of Victoria. It announced Thursday that it has secured almost 75% of Victoria's shares. The takeover boosts PMI's efforts to pivot to smoke-free products.
My ambition is that by 2025, 50% of our sales, of our total net revenue, will be coming from non-combustible products.
The company's CEO said in a statement that Victoria will play an important role in PMI's Beyond Nicotine strategy as it transitions to a healthcare and wellness company.
Single biggest impact this company has on the society are cigarettes. And unless we start in a meaningful way addressing the problem of cigarettes, I don't think we really will be a sustainable business.
But health groups like the American Lung Association and the American Thoracic Society are against the takeover. In a joint statement, they say that PMI could use the acquired technology to make their tobacco products more addictive. It also creates a complex entanglement of conflicts of interest. The Thoracic Society of Australia and New Zealand says that doctors will hesitate to give a patient a treatment that will fund a company that caused the disease to begin with.
But also, there will be a number of investors that I would assume would no longer wish to invest in the type of technologies that Vectura are developing.
On top of that, health groups say that the takeover would endanger Victoria's participation in important health research and policy decisions. Evelyn Lee, NTD News.
And stocks closed sharply lower on Wall Street today, ending a pretty roller coaster week. The Dow fell 166 points, about 0.5%. S&P 500 lost 41 points, 0.9%. And Nasdaq dropping 138 points today, also about 0.9%. And shares in China's embattled property developer Evergrande have dropped 30% this week. The company is billions of dollars in debt, is facing a possible bond default if it can't pay interest, and now some of its lenders are reportedly considered giving it more time to come up with the money. Evergrande reportedly owes $300 billion to nearly 250 banks and others. It's supposed to pay $80 million in bond interest next week, and if it can't come up with the money within 30 days, that will be considered a default. Reuters is reporting that some of its major lenders are now planning to restructure its short-term obligations to give it more time, and markets and officials are worried what might happen if it succumbs to a messy collapse. Regulators, though, haven't given any indication of a possible bailout. Some say, though, the Chinese regime will step in, but even with a managed collapse, possibly reverberations could flow through the Chinese economy. Evergrande's liabilities equal 2% of the country's GDP. So joining us to discuss Evergrande's problems is longtime China analyst, now macro analyst with Ascend Investment Management, Emma Muehlman. Emma, pleasure to have you on the show. Great to see you. We hear some people calling this China's Lehman Brothers moment. Should we be worried, and how do you think this is going to play out?
Well, that's a loaded question for sure. It's definitely of the systemic scale that Lehman Brothers was. Whether it'll be handled the same way Lehman Brothers was remains to be seen. I definitely think, it's too big for the Communist Party to withstand, collapse without any intervention. But you never know. Can't rule anything out. So, I mean, yeah, at 300 billion liabilities, not including what's 6.4 billion that's owed to 1.2 million Chinese citizens who put down money for their house in advance and have not had it built. So imagine that, and it's quite a lot of money, and that would be quite a lot of angry citizens in China. So the Communist Party has a lot on the line here, and we will see how they go about trying to resolve it.
Is the regime not too afraid of hurting foreign investors? Do they not rely on them?
They do rely on them, but at the same time, they do not. I don't think she cares one bit about hurting foreign investors, and I think that was put on display with the education companies, which were largely Western investors holding those stocks. I mean, they took it to zero in a day and didn't care an ounce. So I think, China's influence within the allocators or the indices, as I mentioned earlier, and the funds enable it to basically rob Western investors without them, even the investors themselves, i.e. the people with the money in their 401ks that go into these indices, even realizing it.
Emma Muehlman, Ascend. And the current head of the International Monetary Fund is alleged to have pressured staff to boost China's ranking when she was the CEO at the World Bank. An independent report says former World Bank CEO Kristalina Georgieva pressured staff to boost China's ranking in a flagship report. This was at the same time it wanted to raise capital from China. The report was prepared at the request of the bank's Ethics Committee. It uncovered that the Doing Business 2018 report had China at 78th position when it should have been 85th. Georgieva is now heading the International Monetary Fund, and she says she disagrees fundamentally with the findings of the report. And China is requesting to join the Asian trade deal that former President Trump pulled out of. But Japan says it will need to determine if China can meet the group's, quote, extremely high standards. The U.S. initially spearheaded it to counter China's presence in Asia. NTD's Patrick Hayden has the details on that.
Beijing is applying to join the Asia-Pacific Trade Pact. The creation of the pact was driven by the US to counter China's dominance in the region. And without the US in the group anymore, China is now requesting membership.
The Chinese Communist Party has absolutely zero chance of negotiating anything with CPTPP under the current circumstances.
Japan is chair of the trade group this year, and its foreign minister said a proper look is needed to see whether China can meet the pact's high standards.
I think, what that really means, in sort of bureaucratic speak, is that China's never going to join, and we're never going to allow China to join because you're never going to be good enough to get into this.
Walters says one area where China can't comply with is how businesses there manage personal data.
CPTPP, one of the rules is that, we really shouldn't we shouldn't force companies to store their information within specific countries. Well, China has a national security law that specifically says that. And so, how do you square that circle? I don't think China can.
The move will likely spark a reaction from Washington. but there doesn't seem to be any motivation for the US to rejoin. Clara says China's application is putting pressure on the Biden administration. That's because the US rejoining the pact is a very divisive issue with Democrats and would likely split the party.
The Biden administration is in a pickle. It knows it wants to re-engage to keep China out of CPTPP, but at the same time, it can't politically, domestically at least, commit to re-engage because that splits the base in the year before, virtually a year before the midterm elections.
Of the 11 member countries, Australia, Singapore, New Zealand and Japan are close allies with the US. Clara says if Republicans win a majority in the House in the midterms, then there could be a chance for the US to re-enter the pact.
Republicans who are pro-free trade, come together and then they would support and grant the president authority. Right now, the situation in at least the House is very tenuous for the president. They only have a 5-member majority, which would be completely eliminated if the president tried to negotiate CPTPP.
China's application will likely take around 2 years to process for approval. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
And a top ratings agency says El Salvador's adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender is both risky and it could have a negative impact on the country's credit rating. S&P Global Ratings said in a statement on Friday that there are immediate negative implications for credit and widespread usage of Bitcoin is unlikely. Currently, S&P rates El Salvador at B- with a stable outlook, but competitor Moody's downgraded El Salvador's rating in July. That came partly due to uncertainty around the International Monetary Fund's next round of financing for the country. El Salvador on September 7th became the first country in the world to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. And still to come this evening. A mysterious-looking statue dedicated to the unknown founder of Bitcoin is erected in Hungary. The sculptor says it represents what the digital currency is all about.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, inventor of MyPillow. Thanks to your support, you've helped make MyPillow become one of the fastest growing companies in America. Over the last 12 years, you've helped MyPillow create thousands of jobs right here in the USA.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
That's why I invented MyPillow. My patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs and helps keep your neck supported and aligned. I'm interrupting this commercial right now. Retailers have canceled MyPillow, and to thank you for your support, I'm gonna pass the savings directly on to you. For example, you get my 6-piece towel sets, regular $109.99, now only $44.98, or MyPillow dog beds for as low as $19.99 with your promo code.
For the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, visit MyPillow.com.
Is deep-sea fish oil really healthy? Due to pollution in the oceans, most fish contain heavy metal elements and radioactive substances. That's why it's so important to choose a pure source of omega-3. Puritan Green Vegetable Omega-3 is made from purslane and perilla seeds, which are rich in nutrients and minerals, especially vitamins A, D, E, calcium, and iron. With natural processing and no harmful chemical additives, it has more than 90% concentration of omegas 3, 6, 7, and 9. It effectively improves brain power and is beneficial to the heart's health. Puritan Omega-3 does not smell of fish and contains no pollutants, so both adults and children can safely and easily consume it over a long period of time. Puritan Green Vegetable Omega-3. Eat 2 a day and you'll feel brand new!
Welcome back. The newest version of Bud Light is even lighter. Anheuser-Busch is the first major brewer to launch a zero-carb beer. It's called Bud Light Next, and it comes as health-conscious consumers have sought out lighter beers in recent years. The company says this new beer is aimed at younger consumers seeking out the nutritional makeup of a hard seltzer with the flavor of beer. The taste is described as light, refreshing, and clean with a hint of citrus. Bud Light Next hits shelves early next year. And a statue honoring the founder of Bitcoin is unveiled in Hungary. The catch is, no one knows exactly who founded the digital currency, but the sculptor says that isn't the point. The sculptor says the bust is shiny like a mirror so people can see themselves in it. He also says it represents how Bitcoin belongs to everybody, but at the same time belongs to nobody. The bust was made to represent Satoshi Nakamoto. That's the pseudonym of the mysterious Bitcoin developer. His or her true identity is still unknown. The statue was erected in a business park near the Danube River in Budapest. Bitcoin itself was created in 2008 following the global financial crisis. Its purpose was to bypass traditional banking with peer-to-peer online currency transactions. And that's the latest business updates for this week. You can still catch NTD Evening News with Stephanie Cox. That's at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. For NTD Business, that's all for this week. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday.
Thanks for watching us on YouTube. Don't forget to catch all of our programs on TV. NTD Evening News is on every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Find your local NTD channel at ntd.com/TV.